Bikers saw bullies mock a black girl. What happened next stunned the diner. It all starts when a quiet black woman sits alone in a roadside diner, and a group of bullies decides she's their next target. But the moment a pack of rough, leather-wearing bikers walk through the door, everything changes. What looks like a simple act of protection turns into something no one in the diner is ready for. Because when their iron-faced leader gets a good look at the girl, he suddenly freezes, like he's seen a ghost from a past he never escaped. And when a shocking clue around her neck reveals a secret he's spent decades grieving, the whole room realizes this is no ordinary rescue. This is a reunion wrapped in mystery, danger, and a truth powerful enough to shake a man to his core. But with someone dangerous hunting her down, and a father she never knew fighting to protect her. What hidden past is about to explode, and will this unbelievable discovery save them both or tear their new family apart before it even begins? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The mid-morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of the roadside diner, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Sadie Jefferson sat alone in a corner booth, her shoulders tight as she tried to focus on the menu in front of her. The laminated pages trembled slightly in her hands, betraying her growing unease. 3 men at a nearby table had been watching her since she walked in. At first it was just whispers and sideways glances, but their voices grew louder with each passing minute. Sadie kept her eyes down, pushing her scrambled eggs around her plate with her fork, trying to make herself as small as possible. "Look at that hair," one of them sneered, not bothering to lower his voice. "Guess they let anyone in here these days?" Sadie's hand instinctively went to her naturally coiled hair, which she'd worn proudly despite years of comments like these. Her throat felt tight, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of a response. The diner owner, Maggie, shot the men a warning look from behind the counter, but they ignored her. "Outsiders thinking they belong," another man added, his words dripping with disdain. "This ain't that kind of town." The diner's other patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. Sadie's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she lifted it to her lips, trying to steady her nerves. She was used to this. The sideways looks, the whispered comments, the hostile stares. As a traveling professional, she'd encountered it all before, but knowledge didn't make it hurt any less. "Maybe she's lost," the third man called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Should we give her directions back to where she came from?" Maggie stepped out from behind the counter, her face flushed with anger. "That's enough," she started to say. But before she could finish, one of the men stood up, deliberately bumping Sadie's table as he passed. Her coffee cup toppled, dark liquid spreading across the white tablecloth and dripping onto her lap. Sadie jumped up, grabbing napkins to dab at her skirt, her hands shaking. The men's laughter echoed through the diner, sharp and cruel. She blinked back tears, refusing to let them see how much their actions affected her. Just then, the diner's door swung open with a loud creak. The laughter died instantly as heavy boots thudded against the floor in perfect unison. The Iron Sovereigns entered in formation, their leather vests adorned with patches and their presence commanding immediate attention. The atmosphere in the diner shifted palpably, like a sudden drop in air pressure before a storm. At their head walked Mason Grizzly Hart, his salt and pepper beard and weathered face marking him as their leader. He was a mountain of a man, but he moved with the quiet grace of someone completely at ease with his own power. His eyes swept the diner, taking in the scene. The spilled coffee, Sadie's distressed expression, the 3 men who had suddenly found their food extremely interesting. Grizzly's gaze settled on the men first, his expression hardening as he pieced together what had happened. The other bikers spread out behind him, their formation casual but somehow threatening. The message was clear. They were watching. Then Grizzly turned toward Sadie, likely to assess if she was okay. But as his eyes met hers, something else caught his attention. The small gold pendant hanging from her neck, a delicate piece with a distinctive design. His whole body went rigid, as if he'd been struck by lightning. The diner fell completely silent. Grizzly stood frozen, his eyes locked on the necklace, then on Sadie's face, then back to the necklace. His usual commanding presence faltered, replaced by something that looked almost like shock or recognition. "That necklace," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the silent diner. His hands, calloused and strong, trembled slightly at his sides. The other bikers exchanged confused glances, having never seen their leader rattled like this before. Sadie's hand instinctively went to the pendant, a cherished possession she'd had for as long as she could remember. She looked up at Grizzly's face, seeing something in his expression that made her own breath catch. The harassment from moments ago forgotten, replaced by a strange tension that filled the air between them. The three troublemakers seized this moment of distraction to slide out of their booth, heading for the door. But Grizzly's voice stopped them cold. "Stay right where you are." His tone was quiet, but carried an authority that brooked no argument. The men froze mid-step, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of the biker's command. Maggie stepped forward, her face set with determination. "Those men have been harassing this young woman since she walked in," she said firmly. "I was just about to ask them to leave." Grizzly nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Sadie's face. There was something in his expression, a mix of disbelief, hope, and what looked like pain, that seemed completely at odds with his intimidating appearance. The pendant at Sadie's throat seemed to hang heavier now, as if weighted with unspoken questions. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. Time seemed suspended in the diner, like a photograph capturing a moment when everything changed. Sadie stood there, coffee still dripping from her skirt, looking up at this imposing man who couldn't tear his gaze away from her necklace. The Iron Sovereigns maintained their protective formation, while the troublemakers shifted nervously by the door, waiting to see what would happen next. In that frozen moment, the atmosphere in the diner crackled with possibility, as if the universe had orchestrated this precise meeting, this exact moment in time, for reasons yet to be revealed. The simple gold pendant caught the sunlight, throwing off tiny sparkles that seemed to dance between Sadie and Grizzly, like Morse code signals neither of them could quite decode. The silence in the diner stretched taut as a wire as Grizzly took one hesitant step toward Sadie's table, then another. His massive frame seemed to shrink somehow, vulnerability replacing his usual commanding presence. The other bikers watched, confused by their leader's uncharacteristic behavior. "That necklace," Grizzly said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "May I?" He gestured vaguely with one trembling hand. Sadie nodded, though uncertainty flickered across her face. Grizzly moved closer, studying the simple gold pendant with an intensity that made the air feel thick with unspoken questions. "Where did you get it?" he asked softly, his words catching in his throat. Sadie's fingers brushed the pendant, a gesture so familiar she barely noticed doing it anymore. "It was my birth mother's," she explained, her voice steady despite the strange tension in the air. "It's all I have left of her, and my father. I never knew either of them." Behind Grizzly, two of his fellow bikers had positioned themselves near the troublemakers who'd been harassing Sadie. One of them, a shorter, muscular man with kind eyes, spoke in a low, firm voice. "Think it's time for you boys to leave." It wasn't a suggestion. The three men glanced between themselves, then at Grizzly's massive back, and decided retreat was their wisest option. They shuffled toward the door, their earlier bravado completely deflated. Another biker held the door open for them, his stern expression making it clear they weren't welcome to return. Grizzly barely seemed to notice the exchange. His eyes remained fixed on the pendant, and Sadie could see his hands shaking as he lowered himself into the booth across from her. "I carved that pendant," he said, his voice rough with emotion. 28 years ago. I carved it for my baby girl just before—" He broke off, swallowing hard. The other bikers drew closer, forming a protective circle around the booth. Their expressions shifted from confusion to growing understanding as they watched their leader struggle to find his words. "I was young," Grizzly continued, his eyes never leaving the pendant. "Made a lot of mistakes. Her mother and I both did. When the state got involved, they took her, my little girl. Said I wasn't fit to be a father." His voice cracked. Maybe they were right back then. But I never stopped looking. Never stopped hoping. Sadie sat very still, her coffee forgotten, the earlier harassment fading into insignificance compared to the weight of this moment. "You carved this?" she asked softly, touching the pendant again. The familiar grooves and patterns she'd traced countless times throughout her life suddenly felt different under her fingers. Grizzly nodded, reaching into his vest to pull out his wallet. With shaking hands, he extracted a worn photograph and placed it carefully on the table between them. It showed a much younger version of himself, clean-shaven and smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Around the baby's neck was a golden pendant, identical to the one Sadie wore. "I can remember every cut, every line," he said, his voice thick with memory. "Worked on it for weeks, wanting it to be perfect for her. It was supposed to be something she could keep forever, something to remind her that her daddy loved her, even if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The other bikers exchanged glances, many of them wiping at their eyes or clearing their throats gruffly. They'd known Grizzly for years, but few had ever heard him speak about this part of his past. Sadie stared at the photograph, then back at Grizzly, her mind struggling to process the possibility before her. The peaceful feeling that had settled over her when he first approached seemed to deepen, even as questions swirled through her thoughts. "I searched for years," Grizzly continued, his voice steadying slightly. "Hired private investigators, followed every lead I could find. But after a while, I had to accept that maybe I'd never find her. Had to learn to live with that hole in my heart." He looked up at Sadie, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Never stopped loving her, though. Not for one single day." A movement from the back of the group caught everyone's attention. A younger biker with glasses, Doc, was rummaging through his saddlebags with determined intensity. "You know," he said, his voice carrying a hint of forced lightness, "people always make fun of me for carrying this around." He straightened up, holding a small box. "But I always said you never know when you might need a DNA test kit for a roadside family reunion." The tension broke slightly as several of the bikers chuckled, though their eyes remained fixed on Grizzly and Sadie. Doc approached the table, setting the kit down carefully. "It's one of those cheek swab ones," he explained, his usual joking manner softened by the gravity of the moment. "Takes a few days for results, but, well, might be worth finding out, right?" Grizzly looked at the kit, then at Sadie, hope and fear warring in his expression. He didn't speak, waiting for her response, giving her the space to make her own choice about this unexpected turn of events. Sadie looked at the pendant she'd worn her entire life, at the photograph of the young man who'd carved it with such love, and at the weathered face of the man sitting across from her now. The morning sun continued to stream through the diner windows, catching the gold of the pendant and making it glow, as if highlighting the connection that had brought them to this moment. The other bikers stood in respectful silence, witnesses to what could be either the end of a decades-long search or the beginning of something entirely new. The DNA kit sat between Grizzly and Sadie, a modern answer to an ancient question of belonging and identity, waiting for their decision. Doc cleared his throat and leaned forward, his glasses catching the diner's fluorescent lights as he opened the DNA testing kit. "So it's pretty straightforward," he explained, his usually playful tone replaced by gentle professionalism. "We each take a clean swab and rub it against the inside of our cheek for about 30 seconds. The enzymes in our saliva carry the genetic material we need." Sadie's hands trembled slightly as she watched Doc lay out the testing materials on a clean napkin. Her heart was racing, but underneath the nervousness, there was a sense of rightness she couldn't explain. The pendant felt warm against her skin, as if recognizing its creator sitting across the table. Grizzly's weathered hands were equally unsteady as he accepted the sealed swab Doc handed him. "Never thought I'd be doing anything like this," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Spent so many years hoping, praying." The other bikers had arranged themselves in a protective circle around their table, creating a buffer of leather and denim that shielded them from curious onlookers. Their presence was reassuring, like a family gathering around to witness something sacred. "You just twist the cap like this," Doc demonstrated, his movements careful and precise. "And then swab the inside of your cheek, making sure to get a good sample." Sadie watched as Grizzly followed the instructions, his expression a mix of determination and vulnerability that made him look both stronger and more human than his intimidating appearance suggested. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath and opened her own swab. 30 seconds, Doc reminded her gently. "Just take your time." The diner had grown quieter, the regular customers speaking in hushed tones, sensing the weight of what was unfolding. The sound of clinking coffee cups and quiet conversation created a subtle backdrop to their private moment of discovery. While Doc prepared the samples for testing, several of the bikers went to the counter to order lunch. "You've got to try Maggie's famous chicken sandwich," one of them suggested to Sadie. "Best in 3 counties." "My treat," another added quickly, his gray beard not quite hiding his encouraging smile. Sadie felt overwhelmed by their kindness, these rough-looking men who had transformed from intimidating strangers into protective uncles in the space of an hour. "Thank you," she managed, genuinely touched. As they waited for both lunch and test results, Grizzly began to speak, his voice low and measured. After I lost you," he said, meeting Sadie's eyes. "I hit rock bottom. Couldn't handle the pain of it. Made even more mistakes trying to numb it." He paused, collecting himself. "But then I found help. Found faith. Started rebuilding myself into someone who might deserve a second chance, even if I never got one." Sadie listened intently, her own lunch forgotten as Grizzly shared his journey of recovery, of finding purpose in helping others, of leading the Iron Sovereigns with a commitment to community service and protection of the vulnerable. "Every time we did a toy run for kids in foster care," he continued, "I'd wonder if maybe you were out there somewhere, if maybe you needed someone to bring you a Christmas present too." His voice cracked slightly, and several of the bikers discreetly wiped their eyes. Taking a shaky breath, Sadie began to share her own story. "I always wondered why you never came," she admitted quietly. "The foster homes weren't all bad, but they weren't family. I used to make up stories about my dad being a secret agent or a superhero who couldn't come get me because he was saving the world." She touched the pendant again. "This was all I had. I'd hold it at night and try to imagine who made it, who loved me enough to leave me something so beautiful." Grizzly's eyes filled with tears. "I never stopped loving you, baby girl. Never stopped looking. Just Looked in all the wrong places, I guess." The conversation flowed between them, years of questions and longing finding voice in the safe space created by the biker's presence. They discovered shared traits, the same laugh, the same way of tilting their head when thinking deeply, the same instinct to protect others. Doc had stepped away with the test samples, working at a corner table with careful concentration. The preliminary results would be ready soon, though full confirmation would take days. The waiting seemed both endless and too short, as if they needed more time to prepare for whatever truth the test would reveal. When Doc finally stood up from his workstation, his face had gone pale. The diner grew even quieter as he walked back to their table, holding a paper in slightly shaking hands. He looked between Grizzly and Sadie, his expression a mix of awe and emotion. "I ran it twice," he said softly, his voice carrying in the hushed diner. "It's positive, a 99.9% match." He placed the paper on the table between them. "Sadie, you're Grizzly's daughter." The diner fell silent for a heartbeat before erupting into a buzz of whispered conversations. Plates clinked and chairs scraped as people leaned toward each other, sharing their thoughts on the miracle unfolding before them. Sadie stared at the test results, her vision blurring with tears. Her hands trembled as she set down the paper, and Grizzly reached across the table, his weathered palm open in invitation. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her smaller hand in his. "I never stopped praying," Grizzly whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Every single night I asked God to keep you safe, wherever you were." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, as if trying to make up for 28 years of missed comfort. The other bikers maintained a respectful distance, though their protective presence remained steady. Maggie, the diner owner, quietly placed fresh coffee cups in front of both father and daughter, her own eyes glistening. Sadie felt like her heart might burst from the overwhelming flood of emotions. Relief at finally knowing where she came from. Longing for all the years they'd lost. Confusion about how to move forward from this moment. The pendant at her throat seemed to pulse with new meaning, a tangible link between past and present. She started, then paused, gathering her courage. The warmth of her father's hand gave her strength. "I need to tell you something. About why I'm really here." Grizzly leaned forward, his expression concerned. "What is it, baby girl?" "The work conference. It's real, but it's not the whole truth." Sadie's voice dropped lower, and she glanced nervously toward the diner's windows. "I'm running from someone. My ex-boyfriend, Evan, She swallowed hard. "He's gotten dangerous." The atmosphere around their table shifted instantly. The other bikers subtly moved closer, their bodies tensing with protective instinct. Grizzly's hand tightened slightly around hers, not enough to trap, just enough to reassure. "Tell me," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. At first he was charming, perfect even, but then he started controlling things. My friends, my schedule, my money. Sadie's free hand wrapped around her coffee cup, seeking its warmth. "When I tried to leave the first time, he threatened to hurt himself. The second time, he threatened to hurt me." Doc pulled up a chair, his usually cheerful face serious. "Has he followed you?" "I thought I was careful," Sadie said. "I changed my phone number, used cash when I could, but I forgot about my hotel rewards account. I was logged in on his tablet and never thought to—" Her phone buzzed against the table, making her jump. The screen lit up with a notification, and all the color drained from her face. "He knows where I am," she whispered, staring at the message. "He tracked the hotel booking I just made in town." The reaction was immediate. The bikers moved with practiced efficiency, forming a loose circle around their table. Grizzly stood, still holding Sadie's hand. "Nobody's going to hurt you," he promised, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Not while I'm breathing, and not while my brothers are standing." Around them, the other members of the Iron Sovereigns nodded in agreement. Their faces were set with determination, the same look they wore when protecting abuse survivors or escorting frightened witnesses to court. "Tank," Grizzly called to one of the larger members. "Get the boys outside. Set up a perimeter. Wolf, call ahead to the Mountain View Motel. Tell Sarah we need the safe room." He turned back to Sadie. "We've got a network of safe places, people we trust. We'll figure this out together." Sadie looked around at these men, strangers just hours ago, who now stood ready to defend her. Her father's hand remained steady in hers, an anchor in the storm of her fear. "My stuff," she said. "It's all at the hotel where I just checked in." "Ghost and Shadow will go get it," Doc assured her. "They're good at being invisible when they need to be." Maggie approached their table, her car keys in hand. "There's a back exit through my kitchen," she offered, "and I'm happy to be a witness if you need one. I've seen too many people hurt by men like that." The bikers began moving with purpose, coordinating through subtle hand signals and quick nods. Some headed outside to their motorcycles, while others positioned themselves near the diner's windows and doors. "Ready?" Grizzly asked softly, helping Sadie to her feet. She nodded, clutching her purse close. The protective circle of leather-clad men moved with them as they made their way through Maggie's kitchen toward the back door. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the parking lot where their motorcycles waited, chrome gleaming. "Stay close to me," Grizzly instructed, leading Sadie toward his bike. The other Iron Sovereigns fell into formation around them, their engines rumbling to life one by one. The sound was like thunder, but instead of frightening Sadie, it made her feel safer. "We'll handle this," Grizzly promised, as he helped her with a spare helmet. "You're not alone anymore. Whatever happens, you've got family now." The words, "family now," echoed in Sadie's heart as she climbed onto the motorcycle behind her father. After 28 years of searching for belonging, she'd found it in the most unexpected place, surrounded by a group of bikers who looked fierce but acted with pure love and protection. As they prepared to pull out of the parking lot, the Iron Sovereigns moved into escort position, their bikes forming a protective shield around Grizzly and Sadie. Their chrome gleamed in the afternoon sun, and their leather cuts bore patches that spoke of brotherhood and honor. The afternoon sun was beginning to soften as the convoy of motorcycles pulled into the Mountain View Motel. The establishment sat nestled against rolling hills, its well-maintained exterior and carefully tended flower beds suggesting care and attention that went beyond the typical roadside lodging. Doc pulled ahead to the office, while the rest of the Iron Sovereigns maintained their protective formation around Grizzly's bike. Sadie's arms were still wrapped around her father's waist, her grip having relaxed somewhat during the 30-minute ride. The rumble of engines died down one by one, leaving a watchful silence. "Sarah's got rooms 7 and 8 ready," Doc announced as he returned, twirling 2 key cards between his fingers. "Both have clear sight lines to the parking lot and the back exit." Grizzly helped Sadie off the motorcycle, keeping one hand protectively near her elbow. "I'll take 8, he said. "That way I'm between you and anyone coming from either direction." 2 riders, Ghost and Shadow, pulled into the lot with Sadie's luggage secured to their bikes. They'd retrieved her belongings from her original hotel without incident, though their alert expressions suggested they'd been prepared for trouble. "Let's get you settled," Grizzly said softly. The group moved efficiently, checking the rooms before allowing Sadie inside. Tank and Wolf took up positions at opposite ends of the building, while others arranged their bikes for optimal coverage of all approaches. Inside room 7, Sadie sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to breathe. The room was clean and cozy, with warm-colored walls and sturdy furniture. A small kitchenette occupied one corner, and heavy curtains could be drawn across the windows. "Hungry?" Grizzly asked, hovering near the door. When Sadie nodded, he pulled out his phone. "There's a good Chinese place that delivers. The owner's daughter used to need our help. Now she makes sure we're well fed whenever we're in town." While they waited for the food, Grizzly pulled a chair closer to where Sadie sat. There was so much to say, so many years to bridge, that neither knew quite where to begin. "Tell me about your work," Grizzly finally said, his voice gentle. "What do you do?" Sadie's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I'm a graphic designer," she said. "I work for a marketing firm in Charlotte. This trip was supposed to be for a conference in Atlanta." She managed a small smile. "I guess plans change." "That they do," Grizzly agreed. "You're creative then, like your mother." His eyes grew distant for a moment. She could draw anything she saw. A knock at the door made them both start, but it was just Doc announcing the food had arrived. The aroma of kung pao chicken and vegetable lo mein filled the room as they spread the containers across the small table by the window. As they ate, the stories began to flow more easily. Grizzly told her about the Iron Sovereigns, how they'd become his salvation after hitting rock bottom, how they'd helped him find faith and purpose. He described their work escorting abuse survivors to court dates, protecting witnesses, and running toy drives for underprivileged kids. "Last Christmas," he said, smiling at the memory, "we filled 57 backpacks with supplies for homeless teens. Every single member contributed something." Sadie listened, chopsticks paused halfway to her mouth, as the image of these tough bikers shopping for school supplies and warm socks filled her mind. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "What about you?" Grizzly asked, his eyes searching her face. "These past years, were they good to you?" Sadie set down her food, considering her words. "I survived," she said finally. "My adoptive parents, they tried their best, but they never really understood me. I learned to be independent early, got scholarships, worked through college, built my career." She twisted her napkin in her lap. "But it was lonely, always feeling like I had to prove I deserved to take up space." Grizzly's hand tightened around his plastic fork until it creaked. "You never had to prove anything," he said roughly. "You deserved the world from the moment you were born." The evening deepened outside their window, and the sounds of motorcycles occasionally rumbled past, the Iron Sovereigns maintaining their patrol. Every hour, someone would knock softly to report all clear, each member taking their shift with quiet dedication. As night settled in, Sadie found herself growing weary, not just physically, but from the emotional weight of the day. Grizzly noticed immediately. "You should rest," he said, standing to clear away the empty containers. "I'll be right next door if you need anything. Just knock on the wall. The boys will be outside all night." Sadie nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the contrast between this moment and every other night she'd spent looking over her shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "All of you." Grizzly paused at the door, his expression soft despite his weathered features. "Get some sleep, daughter," he said, the word carrying all the weight of 28 years of waiting to say it. After he left, Sadie prepared for bed in a daze. She could hear the low murmur of voices outside, the occasional sound of a motorcycle being repositioned, the quiet dedication of men standing guard. Instead of feeling trapped or anxious, as she had so many nights recently, she felt protected. She fell asleep to the gentle rumble of idling bikes, a sound that should have been disturbing but instead wrapped around her like a shield. The Iron Sovereigns maintained their vigil through the night, rotating shifts with military precision, while in the next room, Grizzly sat in a chair by his door, too full of emotions to sleep. When morning came, sunlight crept through the slats in the blinds, painting stripes across Sadie's bed. She was just beginning to stir when a gentle knock sounded at her door. "Sadie?" Grizzly's voice was soft but clear. "Did you sleep okay?" The morning sun had warmed the pavement as Sadie stepped out of the small cafe where they'd had breakfast, the smell of coffee and bacon still lingering in the air. A row of motorcycles gleamed in the light, their chrome surfaces winking like mirrors. The Iron Sovereigns stood in loose formation, their leather vests catching the breeze. Grizzly approached her, holding out a spare helmet. "Ever been on a bike before?" Sadie shook her head, taking the helmet with slightly trembling hands. "Never." "Don't worry," he said softly. "I've been riding longer than you've been alive." His weathered face creased in a gentle smile. "Just hold on tight and lean with me when we turn. Your body will know what to do." He showed her how to secure the helmet properly, then helped her climb onto the back of his bike. The leather seat was warm from the sun, and the machine felt alive beneath her, even at rest. Sadie's hands found the handholds behind her seat, but Grizzly shook his head. "Hold on to me," he instructed. "It's safer, and it helps you feel the bike's movement better." Hesitantly, Sadie wrapped her arms around his waist. The leather of his vest was smooth against her hands, and she could feel the solid strength of him, steady as a mountain. Something deep in her heart ached at the contact, all the years she'd missed having a father to hold on to. The bike rumbled to life beneath them, and Sadie tightened her grip instinctively. Around them, the other motorcycles started up in a rolling thunder of sound. Doc pulled up alongside them, giving Sadie a reassuring thumbs up. They started slowly, Grizzly leading the group through quiet streets lined with maple trees. The morning air was cool against Sadie's face, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass and late summer flowers. As they rode, Grizzly pointed out landmarks with gentle taps to her hand. "Church where we hold our meetings," he called over his shoulder, indicating a small white building with stained glass windows. "Food bank where we volunteer on Thursdays." A brick building with a mural of vegetables painted on its side. "Community center. We teach motorcycle safety courses there." At each turn, Sadie found herself naturally moving with the bike, her body learning to trust the machine and the man guiding it. The initial terror melted into something closer to excitement as they leaned into curves, the world tilting gracefully around them. They stopped for lunch at a small park, the bikers spreading out around a wooden picnic table shaded by old oak trees. Someone produced sandwiches and cold drinks from saddlebags, and the atmosphere was almost festive until Doc gently steered the conversation where it needed to go. "We need to know more about this ex of yours," he said, his voice kind but firm. "The more we know, the better we can protect you." Sadie's hands tightened around her water bottle. The plastic crackled under her grip as she stared at the table's weathered surface. "His name is Marcus," she began quietly. "We dated for 8 months. At first, he was perfect, charming, always bringing me little gifts, wanting to spend time together." Grizzly sat beside her, close enough to offer support, but not so close as to crowd her. His presence gave her strength to continue. "It changed so gradually, I almost didn't notice. He'd get upset if I went out with friends without him. Started checking my phone, saying he was just worried about my safety, asked me to share my location with him in case of emergencies." She drew a shaky breath. "Then came the comments about my clothes, my makeup, how other men looked at me. He started showing up at my workplace unexpectedly, Called my boss once to check if I was really working late." The bikers listened in silence, their faces growing darker with each detail. Grizzly's hands had curled into fists on the table. "2 weeks ago, he got violent for the first time," Sadie whispered. "Threw a glass against the wall when I said I was going to the conference without him. Said if I left, I'd regret it. That's when I knew I had to get out." "Son of a—" one of the bikers started, but Grizzly silenced him with a look. "You did the right thing," Grizzly said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're not alone anymore, Sadie. Not ever again." The afternoon sun was beginning to soften when a motorcycle roared into the park. Tiger, one of their scouts, pulled up to the table with urgency in his movements. "We've got trouble," he said without preamble. "Dark-haired guy in a black SUV. Been asking about a woman matching Sadie's description in towns along the highway. Shows her picture on his phone, says she's his girlfriend, that he's worried about her." Sadie's face went pale. "That's him. That's Marcus." Her hands began to shake. "How did he find me so fast?" "Doesn't matter," Grizzly said firmly, standing up. "We're moving you somewhere safer. Our clubhouse has security systems, reinforced doors, and there's always someone there." The bikers moved with practiced efficiency, packing up their things and mounting their bikes. This time when Sadie climbed behind Grizzly, she held on tighter, grateful for his solid presence as fear threatened to overwhelm her. They rode through the lengthening shadows of late afternoon, taking back roads and switching directions several times to ensure they weren't followed. The sun was setting when they finally turned onto a long gravel drive bordered by tall pines. The clubhouse emerged from the trees, a large converted farmhouse with warm light spilling from its windows. Motorcycles were parked in neat rows along one side, and a high fence surrounded the property. As they pulled into the yard, Sadie could see security cameras mounted discreetly under the eaves, their small red lights blinking steadily in the gathering dusk. The rumble of engines faded to silence as the group parked their bikes. Sadie remained seated for a moment, still holding on to Grizzly, watching the golden light from the windows paint patterns on the gravel drive. For the first time since she'd fled her apartment, she felt truly safe. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains as Sadie woke in her new room at the clubhouse. For a moment, she felt disoriented by the unfamiliar setting. The handmade quilt covering her bed, the solid wooden furniture, the gentle whir of a ceiling fan above. Then she remembered where she was and why, and a complicated mix of emotions washed over her. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. "Come in," she called, sitting up and smoothing her hair. 3 women entered, carrying trays loaded with breakfast. They introduced themselves as Mary, Linda, and Rose, wives and partners of club members. The smell of fresh coffee and warm cinnamon rolls filled the room. "We thought you might like some breakfast in bed, honey," Mary said, setting down her tray. She was a maternal figure with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "And maybe some company, if you're up for it?" Sadie felt tears prick at her eyes, touched by their thoughtfulness. "That would be really nice, actually." The women settled around her room, Linda perched on the window seat, Rose claiming the armchair, and Mary sitting at the foot of Sadie's bed. They shared stories as they ate, telling her about life in the club family, their own journeys to finding peace and belonging here. "Get some rest today," Rose insisted as they gathered the empty plates. "You're safe here. Let yourself breathe." Throughout the morning, Sadie could hear the comfortable sounds of life in the clubhouse, voices calling greetings, motorcycles starting up and returning, music playing softly from somewhere downstairs. Around noon, there was another knock at her door. This time it was Grizzly, looking uncertain but determined. "Thought maybe we could talk," he said softly. "If you're ready." Sadie nodded, moving to sit in one of 2 chairs by the window. Grizzly took the other, his large frame making the furniture seem smaller. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeams. "I have so many questions," Sadie finally said. "About my mother, about what happened. Why you gave me up." Grizzly's face tightened with pain. "I didn't give you up, Sadie. Not willingly. I fought for you with everything I had." He took a deep breath, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I met your mother, Caroline, when I was 22 years old and fresh out of Marine boot camp. She was beautiful, smart, from a wealthy family. I was just a poor kid who'd joined up to make something of himself." He smiled sadly. "We fell hard and fast. When she got pregnant, I was over the moon. Wanted to marry her right away." Sadie leaned forward, hanging on every word. This was the history she'd wondered about her whole life. Her family, Grizzly's hands clenched. "They weren't happy about their daughter being involved with someone like me. When you were born, they convinced Caroline to move back home with them. Said it was just temporary, just until she recovered." His voice grew rough. "Then the lawyers came." Tears rolled down Sadie's cheeks as Grizzly described how Caroline's family had pressured him, using their money and connections to paint him as unfit. How they'd threatened to drag out custody battles for years, bankrupting him with legal fees he couldn't afford on a Marine's salary. "They brought me papers," he said, his own eyes wet now. "Said if I signed away my rights, they'd make sure you had everything. The best schools, the best opportunities, things I couldn't give you then. Said if I really loved you, I'd want that for you." "Oh, Dad," Sadie whispered, the words slipping out naturally. She reached for his hand. Grizzly's fingers closed around hers, holding on like a lifeline. "I was young and scared and stupid. By the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. They moved away, changed numbers. I hired private investigators when I could afford it, but they'd covered their tracks well." "What happened to my mother?" Sadie asked softly. "Car accident when you were 3, Grizzly said. "I found out too late for the funeral. By then you'd already been adopted through a private agency. The trail went cold." They sat together, crying quietly, grieving for all the years they'd lost. But there was healing in the tears, in finally knowing the truth, in holding each other's hands across the gap of time. As afternoon faded toward evening, delicious smells began wafting up from the clubhouse's backyard. The sound of laughter and music grew louder, and Mary appeared to invite them down to the barbecue. The backyard had been transformed. Strings of lights hung between trees, picnic tables were covered with checkered cloths, and a massive grill sent up fragrant smoke. Club members and their families moved about, carrying dishes, telling jokes, children running between the adults' legs. Grizzly introduced Sadie to everyone properly this time. She met Doc's wife, Sarah, who taught 3rd grade. Tiger's teenage daughters immediately adopted her as a big sister. The club's treasurer, an older man everyone called Books, told her stories about Grizzly's early days in the club that made her laugh until her sides hurt. As darkness fell, someone built a fire in the stone pit. People gathered around it with paper plates loaded with food, the conversations flowing easily. Sadie found herself sitting between Grizzly and Mary, watching the flames dance while children roasted marshmallows nearby. The first stars were appearing in the deepening blue above when Grizzly quietly asked, "How are you holding up?" Sadie looked around at the circle of faces warmed by firelight, at these people who had so quickly embraced her as family. She thought about the fear that had driven her here, and how it seemed to recede a little more with each passing hour. "I feel safe," she said softly, leaning against her father's shoulder. "Safer than I've felt in years." The firelight flickered across Grizzly's face as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and for the first time in decades, father and daughter sat together beneath the stars, The morning sun filtered through the clubhouse windows, casting warm patches across the wooden floors. Sadie sat at the kitchen counter, sipping coffee and watching Mary knead dough for the evening's dinner rolls. 2 days had passed since her world had changed forever, and the sense of belonging grew stronger with each passing hour. "Need any help?" Sadie asked, pushing up her sleeves. Mary smiled, flour dusting her cheeks. "You could start chopping vegetables for the coleslaw. We're expecting about 40 people tonight." Sadie found a cutting board and began slicing cabbage, falling into an easy rhythm. Outside, she could hear the rumble of motorcycles as club members came and went, preparing for the sunset bonfire. Grizzly had invited Maggie from the diner and her staff, wanting to thank them properly for their part in the reunion. Throughout the afternoon, more people arrived carrying dishes and supplies. The back lot of the clubhouse transformed as tables were set up and strings of lights were hung between posts. Doc and Tiger dug out the fire pit, carefully arranging logs while their wives set up chairs in a wide circle. Sadie moved between tasks, helping wherever needed. She stirred massive pots of baked beans, arranged platters of cookies, and learned the stories behind family recipes shared by the club members' wives. Every so often, she'd catch Grizzly watching her with a proud smile that made her heart swell. As sunset approached, the gathering came alive. Music played from portable speakers, mixing with laughter and conversation. The smell of grilling meat filled the air as hamburgers and hot dogs sizzled. Maggie arrived with her staff, bringing several homemade pies and warm hugs for Sadie. "Look at you, honey," Maggie said, holding Sadie at arm's length. "You're glowing. Being with family agrees with you." Sadie felt herself blush. "It feels right," she admitted, "like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." The fire crackled to life as darkness began to fall, casting dancing shadows across the gathered faces. People filled plates and found seats, conversations flowing easily between bikers, family members, and diner staff. Sadie sat between Mary and Sarah, soaking in the warmth of community. After most people had eaten, Grizzly stood up and cleared his throat. The crowd fell quiet, turning toward him expectantly. "First, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," he began, his deep voice carrying clearly. "Especially Maggie and her crew, who were there the day my prayers were finally answered." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "Some of you have been with me through all the years I searched for my daughter. You listened to my hopes, supported my faith that somehow, someday, I'd find her." Sadie felt tears welling up as Grizzly continued. "And now, by God's grace, here she is." He turned to face her directly. "Sadie, would you come here, please?" On shaky legs, Sadie stood and walked to her father's side. The firelight caught the wetness on his cheeks as he reached behind his chair and pulled out something wrapped in tissue paper. "In this club," he said, "family isn't just about blood. It's about honor, loyalty, and love. We protect our own, no matter what." His hands trembled slightly as he held out the package. "This is for you, daughter." Sadie carefully unwrapped the tissue paper, gasping as a leather vest was revealed. It was beautifully crafted, with the Iron Sovereign's crest embroidered on the back above the words, "Family by Honor," in elegant script. "Welcome home, baby girl," Grizzly whispered. A sob escaped Sadie's throat as she threw her arms around her father's neck. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Mary stepped forward to help Sadie into the vest, smoothing it across her shoulders while others gathered to admire the craftsmanship. The celebration kicked into high gear after that. Someone brought out guitars, and soon music filled the night air. Stories were shared, jokes told, and memories made. Sadie found herself pulled into impromptu dancing, taught the club's secret handshake, and showered with hugs and words of welcome. As the evening wore on, Sadie's phone buzzed in her pocket. Seeing her boss's number, she excused herself to step away from the noise. She walked just beyond the circle of firelight, where she could hear better. "Hi, Linda," she answered, keeping her voice professional despite the festivities behind her. "Thanks for calling back about my leave request." She listened as her boss expressed concern and support, assuring her that her position would be waiting when she felt ready to return. Relief washed over her, one less worry to carry. "Thank you so much for understanding. I really appreciate—" A hand clamped around her arm, yanking her backward. The phone clattered to the ground as a familiar voice hissed in her ear. "So this is where you've been hiding." Terror froze Sadie's blood as Evan's fingers dug into her flesh. His breath was hot against her neck, reeking of alcohol. "You think you can just run away?" he snarled. "After everything I've done for you?" Sadie's throat unlocked. She screamed, a piercing sound that cut through the night air like a blade. The music stopped. Chairs crashed as people leaped to their feet. Thundering footsteps pounded toward them as shadows moved in the darkness, and Sadie heard her father's voice roar above the chaos. "Get away from my daughter!" The world exploded into chaos. Multiple figures charged through the darkness as Grizzly reached Sadie first, his powerful hands breaking Evan's grip. Doc and Big Mike flanked them, instantly, creating a protective wall between Sadie and her ex, while Grizzly pulled her away. "I've got you, baby girl," Grizzly murmured, cradling her against his chest. "You're safe now?" Evan stumbled backward, his face contorted with rage. Before anyone could stop him, he shoved Sadie hard, sending her sprawling onto the gravel. She hit the ground with a cry of pain that made Grizzly's face darken dangerously. "You ungrateful witch," Evan shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Sadie. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? Running off with a bunch of criminal bikers?" "Back away now," Grizzly warned, his voice deadly quiet as he helped Sadie to her feet. She trembled against him, fighting back tears as she examined the fresh scrapes on her palms and knees. Mary and Sarah rushed forward with first aid supplies, while more club members formed a protective circle. In the distance, police sirens wailed, growing louder. "Someone called the cops!" Evan sneered, straightening his jacket. "Good. They need to see what kind of people you're really running with, Sadie." 2 police cruisers pulled into the lot, lights flashing. Officers emerged with flashlights drawn, quickly advancing on the scene. "What's going on here?" demanded the lead officer, Officer Martinez, according to his nameplate. Before anyone could speak, Evan stepped forward, his demeanor instantly transforming. Gone was the snarling aggressor. In his place stood a concerned boyfriend, voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Thank God you're here, officers. These men attacked me when I tried to check on my girlfriend. She's been missing for days, and I've been worried sick." Sadie tried to protest, but her voice caught in her throat. The familiar paralysis of fear gripped her, the same helplessness she'd felt every time Evan had twisted the truth to others. "That's a lie," Grizzly growled. He grabbed her in the dark and assaulted her. "Look at her arms. You can see his fingerprints." Officer Martinez held up his hand. "Everyone needs to separate right now. We'll take statements individually." The second officer, Reynolds, began organizing people into groups. Evan was escorted to one cruiser, while Sadie was led to a quiet spot near the clubhouse. Grizzly watched helplessly as they pulled him aside for questioning, his weathered face tight with worry. "Take your time," Officer Martinez told Sadie gently, notepad ready. "Start from the beginning." Sadie wrapped her arms around herself, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Evan is my ex-boyfriend. I left him because he was becoming controlling and violent. I've been staying here with my father and his club while I figure out my next steps." "Your father?" Martinez glanced toward Grizzly. Yes, we just found each other after being separated for years. It's complicated, but we have proof. DNA tests and everything. The club has been protecting me because Evan's been trying to track me down. Across the lot, she could hear Evan's voice rising theatrically. They've brainwashed her. These thugs are keeping her here against her will. Sadie's hands clenched into fists. He's lying. He's always lying. He's the one who followed me here, who grabbed me in the dark and hurt me. Martinez examined her arms, noting the developing bruises. We'll document these injuries. Has he hurt you before? Yes, but I never reported it. I was too scared. He always knew how to make people believe his version of events. Near the other cruiser, Grizzly was trying to explain the situation to Officer Reynolds. Sadie could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself, a man accustomed to being judged by his appearance, fighting to be believed. Look, I know my record isn't clean, she heard him say. I've made mistakes in my past, but I've been straight for 20 years now. That man attacked my daughter, and we were protecting her. Nothing more. The questioning continued for what felt like hours. Other party guests provided statements, including Maggie and her staff, who verified the recent family reunion story. Still, Evan's performance was compelling. The concerned boyfriend, the upstanding citizen worried about his girlfriend falling in with a dangerous crowd. Finally, the officers conferred privately before addressing the group. Here's where we stand, Martinez announced. We have conflicting accounts and no independent witnesses to the initial altercation. We'll be documenting everything and filing reports, but no arrests will be made tonight. This situation remains under review, Reynolds added firmly. I strongly suggest everyone stay away from each other while we investigate further. Evan smiled smugly as he was escorted to his car. Don't worry, Sadie, he called out. I'll help you get away from these people. You'll see I was right about everything. The police cars pulled away, leaving an uneasy silence behind. The festive atmosphere of earlier was completely shattered. Sadie stood rooted in place, arms wrapped around herself, staring into the darkness where the cruisers had disappeared. What happens now? She whispered as Grizzly approached. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Now we wait, and we pray, and we stay alert. But no matter what happens next, you're not facing it alone anymore. The bonfire had burned down to glowing embers, casting long shadows across worried faces. Club members began quietly cleaning up, speaking in hushed tones about increased security measures. Sadie leaned against her father's solid presence, exhausted and scared, but clinging to one certainty. She finally had people willing to stand between her and her fears. Dawn had barely broken when a persistent knocking echoed through the clubhouse. Sadie, who had barely slept, heard voices in the main room. She pulled on her robe and quietly opened her door to listen. I couldn't wait any longer. Maggie Turner's familiar voice carried down the hallway. And I brought people who need to speak up. Grizzly, who had been up most of the night keeping watch, ushered them inside. Come in, all of you. Sadie, you might want to hear this, honey. Sadie stepped into the main room, where she found Maggie from the diner, standing with two men she didn't recognize. Their faces were lined with concern and determination. These are regulars from my place, Maggie explained, gesturing to the men. Tom and Keith were having coffee yesterday morning when your ex came in asking questions. The taller man, Tom, cleared his throat. We heard him clear as day, talking about teaching you a lesson, said he'd make you regret running away. The way he was talking, he shook his head. It wasn't right. Keith nodded emphatically. We should have said something right then, but we didn't know the whole story. When we heard what happened last night, he looked at Sadie directly. We can't stay quiet. That man's dangerous. Sadie's hands trembled as she sank into a nearby chair. You'd really testify to that? Already wrote it down, Maggie said, pulling out several sheets of paper. Dated and signed, and there's more coming. As if on cue, the door knocked again. This time it was Sarah, one of the diner's waitresses, accompanied by a burly truck driver who introduced himself as Mike. I overheard him too, Mike said, his voice gruff but kind. At the truck stop yesterday morning, he was on his phone, saying things that made my skin crawl, talking about how he'd found you and wasn't leaving without you. Sarah stepped forward, twisting her apron in her hands. And I saw how he treated you before, when you used to come to the diner with him, the way he'd grab your wrist under the table, how you'd flinch when he raised his voice. I should have said something sooner. I'm so sorry. More people arrived as the morning progressed. Regular customers who had witnessed the bullying incident days ago. A gas station attendant who had seen Evan questioning people about Sadie's whereabouts. Each brought written statements, each ready to stand up and tell the truth. Grizzly watched it all with growing emotion, his eyes meeting Sadie's across the room. Think you're ready to make this official, daughter? Sadie took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Yes, it's time. The ride to the sheriff's station was quiet, Sadie holding tight to her father as the motorcycle wound through the morning traffic. Several other bikes flanked them, club members providing silent support. The stack of witness statements sat securely in Grizzly's saddlebag. Sheriff Daniels was waiting for them, his expression serious as he led them to his office. I heard we had some developments, he said, gesturing for them to sit. More than a few, Grizzly replied, laying out the statements on the desk. For the next hour, Sadie spoke. Her voice shook at first, but grew stronger as she detailed everything. The controlling behavior, the isolation, the threats, the way Evan had tracked her down. The sheriff took careful notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting her talk. And these people, he said finally, indicating the statements, they're all willing to testify to what they saw and heard? Yes, sir, Sadie answered. They came forward on their own. Sheriff Daniels leaned back, studying her thoughtfully. You know, when I first heard about this situation, I tried to stay neutral. But these accounts paint a very clear picture. He picked up his phone. Let me call Judge Harrison. We need to get that restraining order in place immediately. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and procedures. Judge Harrison, known for his careful consideration of cases, reviewed everything and acted swiftly. By early afternoon, the restraining order was approved. Sheriff Daniels personally led the team that found Evan at his motel. Sadie and Grizzly waited at the station, hands clasped together, until the sheriff returned. He's been served with the order, Daniels reported. My deputies are escorting him to the county line right now. He's been informed that if he returns, he'll be arrested immediately. Sadie's legs felt weak with relief. Grizzly steadied her, his arms strong around her shoulders. Thank you, she whispered. All of you. I never thought. You've got good people in your corner, the sheriff said kindly, and you showed real courage coming forward. The ride back to the clubhouse was different, lighter somehow, as if a heavy cloud had finally lifted. When they pulled into the yard, Sadie was surprised to see dozens of bikes parked outside. The entire club had gathered, along with many of the witnesses who had come forward. As she dismounted, the crowd burst into cheers and applause. Sarah from the diner rushed forward to hug her. Maggie beamed proudly from the sidelines. Club members surrounded her, offering hugs and words of congratulation. Speech! Someone called out, and others took up the cry. Sadie looked around at all the faces, some familiar, some new, all showing support and care. Her voice wavered as she spoke. I don't know how to thank you all. For years I thought I had to face everything alone, but you showed me what real community looks like, what family looks like. Grizzly wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his eyes suspiciously bright. The cheering grew louder, punctuated by the revving of motorcycle engines, a biker's celebration of victory and justice served. Looking around at these people who had become her defenders and champions, Sadie felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Pure, unguarded joy. She was safe. She was protected. She was home. As evening settled over the clubhouse, the kitchen filled with warm aromas of home-cooked comfort food. The other bikers had quietly excused themselves, giving father and daughter space to process the momentous day. Grizzly and Sadie sat at the worn wooden table, sharing a simple meal of pot roast and vegetables that Sarah, one of the club members' wives, had prepared. "It's hard to believe it's only been a few days," Sadie said softly, pushing her carrots around the plate. "Everything's changed so fast." Grizzly nodded, his weathered face gentle in the kitchen's soft light. "When I walked into that diner, I was just thinking about getting my usual coffee. Then I saw your necklace and—" He trailed off, emotion thick in his voice. "Do you think it was just coincidence?" Sadie asked. "No," Grizzly answered firmly. "I've been sober 15 years now, found my faith along the way. This wasn't chance. God led me there that morning. Had to be." Sadie's eyes welled up. "I've always wondered if someone was watching out for me. Now I know." After dinner, Grizzly surprised her by suggesting they return to the diner. The evening air was cool as they rode through town, stars beginning to twinkle overhead. The diner's neon sign cast a familiar glow as they parked. They slid into the same booth where they'd first spoken, ordering coffee and apple pie. Their hands found each other across the table, fingers intertwined as they talked about memories, dreams, and possibilities. "You know," Sadie said, squeezing his hand, "I used to think you'd lost me. But now I see. You found me exactly when I needed you most." Maggie, the diner owner, approached their table with a smile, carrying something in her hands. It was a framed photograph. Someone had captured the moment of their reunion. Below it, a small plaque read, "Kindness changes everything." With reverence, Maggie hung the photo on the wall near their booth, stepping back to admire it as father and daughter held each other close, tears of joy in their eyes. The rising sun painted the clubhouse windows in soft gold as Sadie woke, feeling a deep sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She lay there for a moment, listening to the gentle rumble of motorcycles starting up outside, and knew with certainty that this was where she belonged. Over morning coffee, she called her employer, explaining her situation. To her relief, they agreed to let her work remotely. The women of the Iron Sovereigns, Sarah, Marie, and Beth, immediately sprang into action, pulling up local rental listings on their phones. "This cute little cottage might work," Sarah suggested, showing Sadie pictures of a yellow house with white trim. Grizzly leaned over to look, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Roof needs some work, but I can fix that up no problem. Maybe get the boys to help paint too." By afternoon, the clubhouse yard was transformed. Strings of lights hung between the trees, and tables groaned under the weight of potluck dishes brought by club members and townspeople alike. The formal ceremony began at 4 o'clock sharp, with Grizzly standing proud as Sadie received her official club vest, emblazoned with the title Princess. "This title represents heart, unity, and honor," Grizzly announced, his voice thick with emotion. "My daughter embodies all these qualities and more." The crowd cheered as Sadie hugged her father, both of them trying not to cry. Maggie from the diner wiped tears from her eyes, and even the toughest bikers looked misty. As the celebration wound down and the sun began to set, Grizzly approached Sadie with a gentle smile. "Ready for your first official ride as my daughter?" Moments later, they cruised down the open highway together, Sadie's arms wrapped securely around her father's waist. The wind kissed her face, carrying away the last of her fears. Both father and daughter smiled, their hearts full of gratitude for this unexpected gift of love, protection, and family that God had orchestrated in His perfect timing. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.